Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, co-editor-in-chief of Retail Insider. Joining me today is George Minakakis, who is founder and CEO of Inception Retail Group. Thanks, George, for joining us today.
Thank you, Mario. Nice to be with you again.
All right, so I was interested and intrigued by a recent LinkedIn post you had about brands, and a couple of key things there. But the one thing that caught my eye was brand must be a reflection of a company's vision. Can you explain that and why that is so important?
Sure. Um, we all know fundamentally brands are made up of a whole bunch of attributes, and each brand is different. But for the most part, a lot of them are, your what you're doing is you've got a brand messaging, your mission, your vision, your values. Then what comes is, all right, so who is our target audience and what's the message and how do we do that effectively and how are we going to make sure that we're consistent with all of that and how do we protect all of that from happening, for anything bad from happening? Like you've seen brands in the past where they've associated themselves with the wrong influencer and the backlash of that. So all these things really matter, right? So you
Mhm.
protecting a brand from a vision point of view, it has to reflect it, and you're gonna protect that with everything. You're gonna have to put up a wall that says only those that are, that we recognize and are comfortable with are actually welcome to enter. In terms of other associations with the brand, it's dangerous, right? I mean, and if we see the last 10 years, how many retailers have come and gone, big retailers, their brands really wavered. They tried to become too many things to too many to too few sometimes, to appease them, and it cost them. I think one great example. Remember J.C. Penney, that they went down a path of changing the brand and how they thought there was a good and logic. It was logical, right?
Mm.
But the backlash from the consumer
Yeah,
was huge, right?
kind of
They
like
had it
kind
cost
of
the
like the
CEO his job.
kind of like the Coke stuff, right? Uh,
Yeah, yeah. You have to be very careful, and that's the premise behind it. What I was saying is that, if you're operating a brand, so what are the things that you're doing to protect it and to keep the sanctity of the brand from being marred by anything, right?
yeah.
And you can only do, a lot of brands go down a path, small and large ones, by the way,
Mm.
um, of trying to be too many things to too many customers.
Yeah,
And then you start getting thin, right? Because you're not going to do things very well. And the one thing that my dad always said to me was, I can only do two or three things really well when he
yeah,
was running his own business. And during my career, I discovered the same thing. You can't do 10 things. You have
true.
to do two to three things that very well.
Yeah. It's interesting that you focused on that because actually just yesterday I was having a discussion with a couple of people that I know that are in the whole area of branding and marketing and a digital world, and I was saying that how different like the media is today, right? Because the media 10, 20, 50, 30 years ago could be all things to everybody, right? You have your business section, you have your sports section, you have your city section, et cetera, et cetera. They can't do that now because they don't have the resources to do it, although they try it, right? And so, as you said, like you're doing 10 different things. You know what? You're doing 10 different things at a certain level, but you're not doing 10 different things at top level, right?
Right. And so, what pops in mind here is that, to your point about the media, now we have AI,
Yeah,
right? That's going to change things.
yeah,
That's going to change things for a lot of brands. And it's going to be about how responsive from an intelligence point of view your company is going to be in order to resonate with customers,
yeah,
right? To continue with your messaging. And if we have things like personal AI assistants that I sat at a round table a few weeks ago with a bunch of 30-year-olds
hmm,
who want personal AI assistants to come to fruition for a number of reasons because they want more convenience. So can you imagine how that changes the brand's proposition, right? So to your point about media, I'm old enough to know that we were using radio and TV a lot,
yeah,
years ago, right?
yeah,
15 years ago, I asked somebody, So what do you think of e-commerce? And they said, I don't know what we're going to do about it. 15 years ago, right?
Mm.
Then you find yourself 10 years ago, we were still struggling, and now all of a sudden, look at where it is.
Yeah.
So what happens with it? And that's changed how we did branding, right? And how the what brand messages we created, how we reached consumers, how consistent we had to be with them,
Yeah.
right? You had to be very careful with influencers. So now all of a sudden, with AI, you're going to change this paradigm one more time,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And even maybe even distance yourself from the actual retail brand, its physical retail brand, only talking from one chatbot to another. What happens then?
Mm. Yeah. What the importance of this and sort of focusing on two or three things. This is it doesn't matter the size of your business, right? Should be doing that whether you're a solo entrepreneur or whether you're a big box company.
Absolutely. I mean, look, I mean, and you can break it down in terms of functional, right? So from operations, front line, you're only going to do two or three things well there. Or maybe, if you're a bigger company and you got more discipline, maybe you could do four or five. But
Hmm.
beyond that, you're pushing it. You're just becoming thinner. Same thing with marketing. I mean, what are you going to be doing? How many things do you want to be doing in there? Yes, you've got probably a lot of messages that you're sending out through different channels,
Yeah.
but you're only still going to do two or three things, maybe four that are going to be consistent in terms of your messaging, right?
Hmm.
The busier it gets, the more confusing and convoluted it gets.
Yeah.
Um, and the same thing with, if you look at merchandising, the disciplines that you put into merchandising a store. If you, it's like going to a room, visiting rooms, and every one of them is a different setup. That's okay if you're selling furniture, right? But if you're
Yeah.
selling clothing, right, you need to stick to some principles. And if you're
Yeah.
selling shoes, you stick to principles.
Yeah.
If you try to do too many things, you become confusing.
Yeah, not to put you on the spot, but does any companies come to mind right off the top of your head that do it right?
Yeah, there are actually, and so and I wasn't prepared for this, but that's okay. You know what? I think that sporting brands like
Uh,
Lululemon and Nike, they do it very well. They're very consistent and
yeah,
disciplined, right? And you see it all the time. You get a larger player like Walmart, in my view, is probably the best at it in terms of a large scale operator with a lot of different commodities that they're selling. So they've got it in my view, they've got it right.
mm,
And you know, I would probably throw Costco in there too, in
yeah.
terms of having it done right. There are others, but I mean, in terms of who stands out the most for me, it's them.
Okay, I got to ask you two other questions here. So recently, I was watching a video, and it was all about some of the jingles and that came out, and how people still remember uh, certain jingles of commercials from, gosh, 30, 40 years ago. How important is something like that?
That's branding power at its best,
Yeah,
right? Because it resonates and it sticks to you, right? It gets into your own DNA and you relate to it.
yeah,
It's powerful. So, and I think that, I don't believe that there's probably only a few retailers that still do that sort of stuff that and do it well. But let's put it where it belongs, Mario. It's crowded out there, right?
yeah,
The messaging, so it's kind of hard to break through. Back in 30, 40 years ago, you're talking about TV and radio, right? If you could afford to be on there, you were. If you could pay enough to have all the
yeah,
gross rating points and everything, right? Um, Easier, more expensive, but hey, things go better with Coke, you
yeah,
know, right? We've never forgotten that. I mean,
yeah.
we never will. And so I think that there's some things that are brand related that will never go away.
And there's certain things that you mentioned, things go better with Coke. And I just think of some of the key, phrases like, the just do it, right? That type of thing. Those are the types of things that just stick up there, right, in someone's mind.
Yeah, and it's all positioning, right? It's when I was very young when I got engaged into marketing, right? And we're talking like 14, 13, 14 years old. And I got my hands on a book that was talking about creating theater of the mind,
Ah,
right? In terms of branding. That's exactly what they've been doing, right? So the brands that have been around the longest, understood that element of creating theater of the mind and capturing your imagination,
Mm,
and it connected with you.
mhm.
So we give Coke some credit here, but because I used to work for PepsiCo, but I mean, a
Yeah,
7 Up, for example, right? I mean, they had great commercials as well.
yeah,
Fresca, every time they opened up Fresca, you had snow or something, right? So I
yeah,
think that create, it's the theater of the mind that you're creating, and it resonates with the public. I
yeah,
can't say that I've really had that experience in a while.
yeah. So, just the last thing I'm going to ask you, George, is, if you're talking to a company that or maybe it's a new company, or maybe it's just a company that's been around for a while but needs to kind of hone in on things and focus when it comes to the whole branding aspect of it. I know it probably could be overwhelming. How do you start? What would you tell them? How do you start on this process?
Well, look, I have a framework, okay? And the framework, I call it RAISE. So raise the brand.
Uh-huh.
And the R stands for, trying to remember, jog my memory here. So responsive intelligence. The A stands for authentic connections with customers.
Yeah.
The I is for innovative collaboration internally, so that you can stick to what you're doing and the principles that you're practicing. And find the S is sustainability in terms of you want sustainable growth, but that comes down with having purpose-driven strategies and building along the lines of long-term value. And
Hmm.
then the E is in the word raise is an empowered culture that has embraced a clear vision of what the brand stands for,
Hmm.
um, and being able to deliver that message internally, and everybody that's working in the organization can pass that message along
Yeah.
uh, in the same manner, to the public. So raise your brand.
All right.
That'd be our
Wonderful.
message.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, George, for joining us today.
Likewise, thank you for having me.